And we are back. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday, 5th of January, 2012 edition. Wow, we're almost through the first week of 2012. Amazing. I want to thank Rob Dew for doing the news portion of InfoWars Nightly News tonight. And I'll have a comment on the TSA and its armed ID checkpoint in Florida at the end of the interview we're about to do. Now, a few years ago, I read the intriguing book, Dr. Mary's Monkey. And a lot of this is original research, but some of it I had actually seen in other government documents and research that I had separately looked at. So it's a very, very credible book. And the author, the foreword is written by, of course, investigative journalist Jim Marrs. But the author lives in New Orleans, and I guess that's why he took an interest in the 1964 murder of a nationally known cancer researcher. And so that sets the stage in this book. Now, this is just a 20-minute interview tonight. But I want to get Edward T. Haslam, the author of Dr. Mary's Monkey, back on the syndicated radio show sometime in the next few weeks to really break this down. Because what reminded me of this book and made me pull it off the bookshelf and reread parts of it again was a few weeks ago, we all saw the leader of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, come out and say that Fidel Castro had told him, look out, they'll give you cancer. And I had read about programs to try to develop fast-acting cancers to go after people like Fidel Castro in Cuba. And now we've got other leaders of Latin American countries coming down with cancer. And so it's become a big debate in Latin America and worldwide. Hey, are they being given weaponized cancer? So one of the leading researchers into this area is Edward T. Haslam, author of Dr. Mary's Monkey. And by the way, it's put out by a great publisher, Trine Day. If you want to find out more, look him up online. But it's also in quite a few bookstores and obviously on Amazon. But here's the man himself. Great to have you with us. What got you onto the path of this? And boil down the book for us.
Well, Alex, I'm from New Orleans, and my father was a doctor at Tulane Medical School. And one of his best friends, Dr. Mary Sherman, was murdered. So the book is first and foremost an investigation into her murder. And the deeper I got into this, the more I realized that she was an expert in cancer and in radiation. And she worked for Dr. Alton Ochsner, who was involved with the framing of Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans. And I heard rumors way back in the 1960s that David Ferrie, who Jim Garrison was pursuing on the JFK assassination, had an underground medical laboratory with this Dr. Mary Sherman. And what I knew that others did not know was that Mary Sherman was world-class expert. And so you have this weird connection of world-class expert and Looney Tune political right-winger. And that's a dangerous combination of events. So I started looking into it, and I realized that the entire story around Mary Sherman's murder had been faked because what happened to her was never told to the public. And she got her arm blown off by a linear particle accelerator, which they were using. That's a radioactive piece of equipment, which they were using to mutate monkey viruses. And the reason they were doing this originally was because 200 million doses of the polio vaccine that had been distributed to the American public in the 1950s and 60s was contaminated with a cancer-causing virus by the name of SV40. And they originally were looking for a vaccine to try to stop this cancer, which is today causing a cancer epidemic in America and elsewhere. And right when they were doing that, that's when the Russian missiles come into Cuba. And New Orleans, a lot of the economy in New Orleans was disrupted by that embargo of Cuba and the sugar and all that other stuff. And the threat of Castro's taking this revolution to the rest of Latin America and spreading it, it threatened the entire system of cheap labor and coffee beans and bananas and all that stuff that was coming into New Orleans. So the decision was made in the spring of 1963 to weaponize the monkey viruses that they were researching in this secret facility. This is like a medical Manhattan project hidden on U.S. government property in uptown New Orleans. And it's located right down the street from the personal residence of the guy that used to be the president of the American Cancer Society. And right down the other street is Lee Harvey Oswald, who's part of this project. He's like a courier runner. And then they bring in this woman who's an expert. I mean, she's very young at the time, but she's an expert in handling cancer-causing viruses. And we know about her training and all that. And they spend the summer weaponizing this. They test it on a prisoner, several prisoners, in fact. The prisoner dies in 28 days, and that's when Lee takes off from Mexico City to bring the weapon down there so they can try to smuggle it into Cuba and kill Fidel Castro. Of course, we also know that Jack Ruby said that he was injected with cancer, and just like the prisoner died in 28 days, Jack Ruby dies 28 days after he's diagnosed with cancer. And Jack Ruby said he was injected. So the ability for them to use this as a political weapon is very real, and it was established a long time ago. And in the 60s, we were told viruses couldn't cause cancer, but I can show you a 1959 Time magazine article where they're talking about cancer-causing viruses and the ability to come up with vaccines. And today we have the HPV vaccine, which is intended to prevent a cancer-causing virus. So they can no longer say there are no cancer-causing viruses because they're out there marketing them.
Sure. I've seen Rockefeller Foundation documents in the 20s and 30s where the Rockefellers were looking at most cancer being viral.
Absolutely.
I mean, these people have been obsessed with this forever. But you mentioned Dr. Henneman in a separate report from PBS Boston. He's interviewed and makes jokes about everybody getting cancer from the shots, like it's very funny. Have you ever seen that clip?
Yeah, that's Maurice Hilleman. He's being interviewed by Dr. Shorter, who's the medical history guy up at the University of Toronto.
That's right, Hilleman. I was saying Henneman, yes.
Yeah, and it's weird humor, but it's very real that they knew that the polio vaccine that we took over to Russia was full of this. See, when they made this vaccine, they grew it on monkey kidneys. And they got out all of the viruses that were in the monkey's kidneys, and all those viruses got into the polio vaccine. And the problem was they were caging monkeys from different continents together. So the Asian monkey was also cross-infected with viruses from the African monkey. So when they started zapping this stuff with radiation to cure it, they were hitting both the SV40, which was the Asian monkey's virus, and in that same concoction was SIV, which is the simian immunodeficiency virus, which is the ancestor to the AIDS virus.
Wow, this is just bombshell. And for those that are new viewers, I hope they research what you're saying, because everything you're talking about, I've separately seen. I mean, you're telling the truth. It's just this is so incredible. And to go back to the fact that your father actually knew and had worked with this lady, and I guess you began to investigate the death itself, and then that's what brought you into all of this. And that's similar to my story, just looking into politics. And then I began to research things, and it just led me to the conspiratorial view, not because I'm a conspiracy theorist, but because we do have these cabals operating. Now, going back, you have quite a few documents in your book from Jim Garrison and his investigation. He was able to end up getting some government documents that they didn't want him to have. Break down some of those.
Well, Jim Garrison came to the conclusion finally that Lee Oswald was a undercover agent who had penetrated the plot to kill Kennedy. That's the same conclusion that we come to, and that Judith is involved with. Garrison did discover up in Clinton, Louisiana, that Oswald was up there with Clay Shaw, and the heart of Garrison's case was the connection between Oswald and Clay Shaw. And Clay Shaw said, I didn't know the guy, and he lied in court, and the federal government wouldn't let Garrison pursue it. But what they were doing up in Clinton, Louisiana, and Clinton and Jackson, which is right next door to Clinton, is that's where they were testing the biological weapon on a prisoner that was being brought over from Angola Penitentiary, which is right down the road. And all that happened, they thought they were going to be rendezvousing with these people in a hot summer afternoon in August in Louisiana, and they forgot to read the newspaper because that was the day after Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech, and instead of the square in front of the courthouse being empty, they were having the Congress on Racial Equality was having a voter registration drive. So everybody saw the black limousine. black Cadillac pull into the square, and the town marshal, John Manchester, went over there and said, "Let me see your ID." And the guy said, "I'm Clay Shaw from the International Trade Mart." And Lee Oswald gets out of the car and tries to register to vote. So we've got sworn congressional testimony putting Clay Shaw and Lee Oswald together in this town where they were murdering the prisoner in order to test the weapon.
Wow.
That's Nazi science.
Well, we know about Huntsville, Texas. It's now been admitted that for decades they've done testing, chemical, biological, on the state prisoners here in Texas. This is going on all over the place. And, of course, we have the real congressional report saying that it was a conspiracy with Kennedy, and then you have the separate whitewash Warren Commission that the mainstream media gives the attention. In the 10 minutes we've got left or so, obviously we could talk for hours about this amazing book. People should get it and read it, and I'm going to have you back on the radio to really break it down. Well, why is this so important for us today? I mean, obviously, if they had weaponized cancer that killed people in 28 days back in the 60s, imagine what they've got now with all the genetic technology. Well,
Alex, what Bernice Eddy, who was the vaccine safety tester at the National Institute of Health, tried to warn us about in 1959. She knew about the contamination of the polio vaccine, and she was trying to tell us there is going to be an epidemic of cancer in the United States. Now, my point is, we got back 15 cases of cancer per year for every case of polio. I mean, the cancer epidemic is more than 10 times the size of the polio epidemic, yet you never hear the word epidemic in the mainstream. Why not? Why was polio an epidemic at 50,000 cases a year and cancer not an epidemic at nearly 2 million cases a year? I mean, on September 11th, we lost 3,000 people to terrorism. That same day, we lost more than 3,000 people to cancer. And every day since then, we have lost 3,000 people to cancer. I mean, we are now running at 1.5 million, 2 million since September 11th. No, I'm sorry. We're at 12 million.
And let's be clear, the magnitude. The United States leads the world in cancer. It's clearly a large portion of it linked to these cancer viruses that they admit hundreds of millions of Americans were exposed to. And I've talked to scientists. They say, well, I saw it in CBS News last year. They're still giving people polio vaccines, oral and shot, that have it. This is not an accident. This is population reduction. I mean, this is amazing. And then the big Rockefeller foundations that own a lot of the big private hospitals and control the cancer industry, they make the money off treating it. And look, 50 years ago, 30 years ago, I've talked to top cancer doctors. When they were going to college, they would travel across the country to see a child with cancer. Now they're everywhere. I mean, this is Armageddon. This is a Holocaust.
Yes. And when you realize the polio epidemic in the first place was probably caused by the introduction of antibiotics in 1942, and they did not want to restrict the antibiotics and pull them off the market, so they pushed for a vaccine. So we got pushed into this whole thing by corporate money and greed in the first place, and we are now, I mean, this is not a political issue. Democrats don't want their kids to die any more than Republicans do, but we are looking at, in the United States, I mean, look around you, like, they're talking maybe 1 in 3 people will have cancer in their lifetime when it used to be like 1 in 10,000. I mean, this is the biggest mistake in the history of government. And this is killing more Americans than all wars we've ever been in combined times about 10.
But I guess at the end of the day, they always talk about how there's too many of us. From your deep research into this, we know this weapon program is going on. We know now they're coming out with vaccines that counter cancer viruses, but they never want to talk about the elephant in the room. Then the very cancer virus fighting vaccines end up causing problems and deaths as well. I mean, your best guess estimate, did this start as an accident or was it premeditated? And clearly they know what's going on today and are covering it up.
I think originally this was kind of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. They found that when they discovered the cancer-causing virus, polyoma, they had already released 100 million doses, and they renamed it SV40. But they had 100 million in having been released and another 100 million sitting on the shelf. And from 1959 or so to 1963, they continued to release the next 100 million because they didn't want to stand up in front of the congregation and say, we just inoculated all your children with a cancer-causing virus. You know, I mean, there's 3 kids in my family. The other 2 have cancer. Okay.
Unbelievable. And your father, what did he think of all this?
Well, first of all, my father was not really into the cancer thing very much. He was an orthopedic surgeon.
He just knew her.
He knew her because they had both come to New Orleans at the same time. He was from Harvard. She was from the University